Everyone, it's Shannon here for Pinkfresh Studio. In today's video, we are going to tackle white flowers, specifically white magnolias. This can be tricky to figure out with inks, so today I'm going to share with you one of my favorite combos to create some really pretty white magnolias. We're going to start with the Magnolia Stamp Set, and we're going to stamp the stamps for all the flowers and leaves. It's just one big stamp onto an A2 panel of white cardstock in detail black. I'm just going to do a light stamping of this. I will stamp it again later, so I intentionally didn't do a perfect stamp. Now I've let the ink on that panel completely dry, and now I'm ready to ink blend with the layering stencils. I started with stencil 1 here. First I'm going to add some Micropore Tape to the back side of my panel so I can interchange my stencils pretty easily. Starting with stencil 1 here, lining it up for the flowers. And then I'm going to start with key lime ink. Very lightly. I want it to be almost much more on the yellow side, so if I just do a very light ink blending with this, I'll get it a little bit more yellow. And I'm ink blending the centers of the flowers, or where the flowers meet the stem. So just a little bit of that key lime. That's all I'm going to do on these flowers, because again, we're trying to get white flowers, so I don't want to add too much color. Now we're going to move on to stencil 3, which is actually the detail layer for all the flowers. I skipped stencil 2 because that's for the leaves, so we'll worry about those next. And for the detail layer on these flowers, I'm going to go with mint, which is almost a bit more on the blue side than the green side, and it just really adds a beautiful coolness to these flowers and a nice shadow, but still maintains them, keeps them looking fairly white. Now we're back to stencil 2, and I'm starting with the leaves, going back to key lime here and ink blending basically the top ends of all the leaves with this key lime color. Once I finish with that, I'll move on to olive and ink blend the lower kind of 2/3 of all of these leaves with this really dark green. I really love this color. I use it a ton. And just creating these nice gradations over these leaves. Now I'm going to remove the stencil, and I'm going to move on to stencil number 4. I'm going to line this up with the leaves. This is the detail layer for the leaves, and I'm going to start with olive again. This time I'm going to go really heavy-handed with this olive and completely ink blend all of the leaves with this color. Well, once I finish with that olive, I'm going to go to an even darker green, which is Evergreen, and ink blend kind of, again, the lower 2/3, lower third of these leaves with this darker color to, again, create a gradation over the leaves and for also the detail layer of the leaves as well. So now that I've finished that detail layer for the leaves, I'm on the last stencil here, and I'm going to ink blend. This stencil has the center for the flower, which I'm going to ink blend in Marigold, a beautiful yellow, really rich yellow. Then I'll move on to gathered twigs for the stem parts, maybe kind of branch part of these buds here. Once I finish that, I'll grab olive and go right over that, just because I felt like that brown was a little bit too brown, so I softened it with a little bit of green. And later this will be a really nice kind of brown green once all the ink kind of dries. So now I've removed the tape and popped this panel right back into my MISTI, and I'm going to stamp it again with that detail black, and that will really make sure that all of my outlines are nice and bold and crisp. Now we're going to move on to die cutting this out with the Magnolia Die. You can see that die is one big die. That die cuts all of the flowers and leaves out, which is awesome. And then I'm going to move on to kind of my background. I have the daisy chain Coverplate die here. Just die cut an A2 panel of white cardstock with it. Then I'm going to grab a die from the Nested Diamonds die set and actually die cut like a little window in this panel, just add a little bit more interest to this background. So I went ahead and ran that through, and now I will pop out any remaining negative petals that are left in this panel. Now that that's complete, I'm ready to go to my A2 top folding white card base. Starting with mint here, I'm going to lightly ink blend the corner, this is specifically the upper left corner, and then I'll ink blend the lower right corner to create this really pretty gradation with that mint. Now I'm moving on to key lime and also ink blending those corners there, and then I'll finish up with a little bit of olive, and this just creates a nice little interest in our background. Now I'm going to grab that die cut panel and add some liquid adhesive to the backside and actually adhere this down onto the card front. You can see here how that little bit of ink blending kind of pokes through the openings in the panel and just adds some nice subtle interest to the background. I put a plate on top of it to allow that ink to set up and let that panel dry nice and flat, and here's our finished background. Now I'm ready to actually create our sentiment. I'm going to grab a sentiment stamp from the Magnolia Stamp Set, and I'm going to stamp it onto some black cardstock. So I am going to do some heat embossing. I did apply some anti-static powder. Now I'm going to ink up the stamp in Versamark ink and embossing watermark ink. Then dip my cardstock into some white embossing powder, tap off the excess, and then of course heat set with my heat tool. Now that I've heat set this, I'm going to trim it down. I'm going to use a ruler and a craft knife and just cut a nice straight line above the top and the bottom of the sentiment to basically kind of create like a strip. After I cut this the top and bottom, I then will grab my scissors and just kind of remove it from the rest of the cardstock. And now with my scissors and by hand, I'm just going to kind of trim out around because the sentiment is 2 lines, so I'm just going to kind of trim it around so it's a little bit tighter around those 2 lines of sentiment. So now that my sentiment is done, I'm ready to actually kind of arrange everything. I'm going to start with my leaves and flowers, all my die cuts, and arrange them over my card front. Once I have the flowers and leaves the way I want them, I'm going to grab a piece of press and seal and place it over my flowers, over my arrangement to kind of hold everything in place, and then pick it up and flip it over. Now for that big center magnolia, I want to double up the foam adhesive, so I'm going to fold the foam adhesive on itself and then remove the backing and then just place that doubled up adhesive on that large magnolia. I want it to kind of pop away from the rest of them. And then for all the leaves and the remaining leaves and flowers, I'm just going to put a single layer of foam adhesive on the back side of them. I went ahead and removed the backing on all the foam adhesive. So now I'm ready to flip over my press and seal and place my arrangement down onto my card front. So I'm just going to press all over to make sure the foam adhesive is stuck to the card front, and then remove my press and seal. Now for my sentiment, I'm going to pop it up as well. So I've added some foam adhesive to that, and then doubled up the right edge here where it's resting on the leaf. This needs to be a little bit over the flower, so I had to use some little doubled adhesive for that right side. Now I'm going to finish up with some metallic gold pearls. Just used some Nuvo crystal drops to adhere those down, and that actually completes my card. You can see here that beautiful subtle background and how our flowers have remained white, but with our color choices for inks, we were able to add a nice shadow and depth to them. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If any questions about the products I used, please check out the links below in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.